I am super excited to be having this conversation with you because we are going to talk about what I think is the greatest game design, game development approach, which is thinking about the player experience. This is going to be the best tool in your arsenal in terms of making a great game, an interesting game, a compelling game, a game that could possibly sell, a game that people are going to love and rave about. So let's jump in and talk about it. As you can see, I've got player experience and a couple of boxes over there drawn badly. Sorry for those of you who are OCD. That's going to show us what exactly feeds into the player experience. First of all, let's give a couple of examples of player experience. I've got my stylus here, so I'm going to do some scribbling as we go along. Let's give this a slightly different color. And when I talk about player experience, I mean things like the mood of the game, the tone of the game, the feeling you get when you play it, when someone sits there playing the game, the general way you want them to be describing what's going through their mind, how they're feeling at that point in time. So if we look at two examples, two RPG examples, where I'm going to write this, we'll write it just here. Look at Skyrim and Fallout 4. Those two games just there. If you know those games, if you've played those games, you know, it just fantastic, huge open world RPG games. What do you believe, first of all, for Fallout 4, what's the experience that you get playing that game? And if you've thought about, that was me stopping so you can pause the video if you wanted to have a think about it properly. Fallout 4, it's post-apocalyptic, so there's been a big nuclear explosion and you're running around. The feeling, I'm guessing here, I haven't talked to anyone on the team, and they might not have used these words, but the feeling I believe they're trying to create is the player experience of being a survivor. Being a survivor, if it was an American survivor, survivor, if you're more English or Australian. And what I mean by that is, as a survivor, when you're playing the game as a player, you feel a sense of loneliness and a sense of being threatened and how there's always a danger, but not necessarily a big monster jumping out type danger, although there are those as well. It's just an ongoing danger of radiation and just the whole land says it's empty and desolate because there's been a nuclear explosion, right? So they want you to be resourceful. They want you to be a survivor. And every aspect of that game is consistently giving you that experience of feeling like a survivor. Now, if we look at Skyrim, made by the same company, very similar mechanics to the game. You know, you're running around, you're increasing your abilities, you're getting experience and stats and so on. But for Skyrim, it's set in more of a medieval fantasy realm. And so a loneliness vibe wouldn't make as much sense because they want you to be interacting and having a little bit of that political conspiracy of this group is out to get that group. Fallout does that as well, but not quite. The groups are a little bit more isolated and just fighting each other. And so Skyrim, I think the experience that Bethesda is trying to give us in Skyrim and a lot of the Elder Scroll games is as an adventurer, which fits with the theme as well. Like you're an adventurer, you've got your sword, and you're off to find your fame and fortune and to save the realm and to protect your people and to make a statement. And as an adventurer, the mood and the feeling and the tone is about being powerful and discovering and being righteous in your quest and being in control of your destiny in a way. So I think those two experiences are very, very different. Obviously, the theme is different. And this is what a lot of rookie game developers, they only go as far as looking at the mechanics. Okay, in this one, you push that button and you hit that way with a sword. This one, you push that button and you shoot that way with a gun. They're looking at the mechanics. And yes, there's some mechanics, but ultimately, they're pretty much the same thing, like hit or shoot, level up this thing or level up that thing. Or they're looking at the world, the theme, and they're saying, well, this one is clearly swords and shields and dragons, so therefore it's got to be different to this one over here, which is all about future tech and scavenging and building things from the things you scavenge. So, but that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. Those things alone don't create an experience for the player. You have to say, how do I, everything right down to my audio, my voice acting, what the NPCs are doing in the world. Do we have NPCs? What the UI looks like, the menus and the buttons. Every single thing needs to be pushing you towards that. So that's why those two games do very, very well, because everything about them oozes either survivor or adventurer. So let's talk about the game that Ben and I and our team are working on, and we can talk about your game as well. So for us, we've decided we want to go for, we've got a different pen for this one up here. We want to go for funny. And we want to go for absurd, which I often spell incorrectly. Absurd situations. So all in all, we're looking for comedy. Comedy is our comedy, funny is our player experience. We want you to laugh. So that's the feeling of being happy and laughing. The tone is going to be silly. The mood is going to be lighthearted and absurd. And that's our overall play experience. So you've seen us in recent videos talking about, is that a funny run or not? Because even at this stage, we're thinking, is our run supporting our experience? What our enemies are doing, does that support our experience? So in one of the videos, I bumped into the enemies and they went sliding off, which is a pretty dumb sort of way of implementing enemies, but it's kind of funny. So maybe in our game, our hero has this accidental power of you push a button and the enemies just kind of drift off, or maybe they walk off against their own will. And they're like, hang on a minute, wait, I want to fight you, stop this. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking for it right now. And we're going to discover it as we make our prototype, as we're making our core. We're going to discover what our game is. But at all points in time, we keep coming back to, it's got to be funny, it's got to be absurd, it's got to be comical, it's got to be whimsical. Maybe not whimsical, maybe whimsical. And so for you, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, I want to show you a little bit more reinforcement of where the player experience, where you're going to be looking to connect to the player experience. And this is these boxes here. What color should we do these? Let's do it in a very exciting dark green. How's that? So underneath player experience, feeding into it is your theme. And your theme consists of things like, can you see over there? Yes, you can. Is story, and is obviously your characters, and your artwork, and your whole atmosphere and environment and lighting and the whole tone of your game is about themes. So for us, there's a whole lot of different themes. We don't necessarily need to make our art funny. Like, you don't need to look at a building and go, that's a funny building. But the building has to support that player experience. So if we want the situations to be absurd, we might have a regular village and a regular fountain in the middle of the village, but there's like a pig living in the fountain and maybe has a little stall. No, that wouldn't work. Maybe living in the fountain and yells at people when they walk past. And the villagers are too scared to do anything about it because the pig's so strong and bossy. And so the fountain's just a regular fountain. It didn't need to be created in some strange sort of magical way, but it supports the fact that we can put a yelling pig in the middle of it to yell at people as they walk past. Maybe the pig becomes a quest giver, maybe it becomes a companion pet, whatever it might be. So if you get my point there about the theme is allowing us to build the player experience. And if you've got a game which is all about, dark and dungeons and Diablo style demons and stuff, and then you have happy sunshiny village, then you need to be doing it for a reason, not just because you think happy was neat. It's good to have ups and downs and dungeons and then sunny, but there's something about in that sunny village, you need to be giving people they need to feel a little bit uneasy about it. If you're going for a whole theme, which might be, oppression, we want the player to feel, stressed and oppressed, for example. Okay, moving on. We also use our player experience to make, if I can write properly, talking and writing, I'll get it one day, about our features. And features include, features is a big bucket here. I've talked about features being your high level combat is a feature. Experience points or leveling up might be a feature. But what I'm talking about here is, and I'm going to write there so you can see it well, mechanics, tuning, and so on. So what do we put into our game? For us, if our game's going to be funny and absurd, you've already seen us probing at examples of that. How do we do the run cycle? and we've only got a couple of levers to pull at the moment. But with those levers, let's make the guy cover territory kind of slowly, but move his legs really fast. And when we get a little bit of audio in there, maybe he's like, that kind of thing. Or if my dream comes true and we have it very Monty Pythonish, he's banging a couple of coconuts as he runs along. That would be my dream come true for sure. But when you're making decisions about your features, you ask yourself, does this belong in my player experience? And how can I have it support my player experience? So in Fallout 4, the fact that the experience is about being a survivor, and the conversation about what if we allow the player to build out their base and scavenge materials and then build defensive elements in their base. Is that going to make them feel more like a survivor? Absolutely it is. So that's a feature that could be, yes, we'll put the time and energy into that. Which leads me to my next point, which is about development. And we're talking about what are your priorities, and we're talking about what resources, so where do you spend your effort? Do you put a lot of time and energy into, do we build this gigantic base building, survival, bunker type stuff? If it feeds the player experience, then yeah. And also in terms of your minimum viable product, MVP, if you guys aren't familiar with that, basically it's saying what's the least amount of stuff we can make and still have our game able to be launched and played. And you're always got to be thinking about your MVP at this stage, because who knows when you might run out of time or budget or motivation to keep working on your game. You want to know that, okay, if we get to that point, yes, it can be a game. It can be a fun combat arena brawler game. If we add that as well, it can be a fun combat arena brawler game with some story and some quest link into it. And if we add this, back to the onion conversation we've had previously. And then something that a lot of people don't realize is that your marketing also needs to be consistent with every other aspect of the experience you're giving players. Right from the very first video they watch, the very first article they read, the very first screenshot Saturday they see from you, there needs to be a consistency. If you take them in one direction of, look at our beautiful world, but then the game is not about beauty, then they're going to be confused. They're not going to feel it. And a lot of this is players, they might not have the words to describe what they really like and don't like and what they're picking up, but they'll know if they're getting it. And they'll use a word like fun, which doesn't help you or I a lot. Don't aim for fun, aim for survivor experience, or aim for funny and comical. That's going to be a better thing for you to make decisions than just aiming for fun, because fun is so subjective and it's not necessarily the goal of the game. It's too high level. But anyway, marketing, so your videos and your images and any messaging, so any stuff you write, any copy you write on posts, etc. And also when you contact the media, you're like, what do I say to them? Say something about your experience. So if we're making a game which is funny and absurd and comical, then in our marketing it might be the funniest game on Steam. There we go. And it may or may not be. We have to live up to that. But there's our marketing kind of halfway figured out, isn't it? Or we make a joke. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because he had a sword stuck in him. That's not a very good joke. We'll put a bit more time in it before we go to the press with that one. But that's the approach we can take. So for you, if you're making a science fiction, dystopic, one man against the empire kind of game, then you need to communicate that somehow in your marketing. You need to use your development priorities to make those decisions. And in terms of what features you make, they have to support that. And obviously the theme, the world, the art style, the music, the voice acting all have to speak to that exact experience, which might be, similar to Fallout. You might be making something which is isolation, or it might be, we want the player to feel like a rebel. That's an okay thing as well. Which leads me to a couple of just throwing a few words at you to get your juices flowing. So maybe your player experience could be about making the player feel powerful, making the player feel clever through strategy, making the game feel frantic. So it's all a lot of, oh crap, here's the enemies, quick, so much going on. Oh my god, I only just survived that. Oh my goodness, here comes another wave. If it's frantic, could be epic. Like Shadow of the Colossus, I think is epic. It's this little guy, the camera's pointing up, and you see these giant enemies or colossi that that you have to climb is just epic. So everything has to be like wide open spaces and expansive, and the music has to be like, oh, very epic kind of thing. It's like a guy with a slightly sore throat with a head cold trying to sing. That's what your game needs to sound like. Also, it could be you want the player to feel godlike. God of War. We want the player needs to feel like a god. They need to feel like a badass. Vulnerable. It could be brave. Could be mellow. Could be intelligent. So at this point, don't just look at a mechanic. The mechanic might be, we've got this incredible fly mechanic. What's your game about? It's about flying. Sort of. That's the mechanic. What's your game about? It's about, we want people to feel like Superman. That's the player experience. You might not ever tell the player Superman, but I want them to feel like Superman. What's that mean? Well, you know how Superman, that feeling they're going for. So you can grab from other IPs as well. We want the player to feel like, like a Superman or Spider-Man with their agility. We want the player to feel like a professional wrestler. They're just like a big oaf and they're just like, get out of my way. So you can use other ways to refer to that in terms of what you do. Okay, so I think that's all my points I'm covering in there. So here we go with a challenge for you guys. Let me jump over to the challenge. I want you to define your player experience. And this is a really important part. This is the perfect time to be doing it. And this is something that you're going to keep throughout the remainder of your project. So define your player experience by aiming for 1 to 4 words. So that the words I told you for ours, we want the player to laugh. Laugh. We want our game to be funny, and we want it to be comical and absurd. And then I want you to put those words in the discussion section and share them with us. Great work. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Please post that in the discussions, and we'll be seeing you in the next lecture.